Hello, and welcome to the Dev Game Club podcast, the cast where a pair of veteran devs look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and each week I am joined by my co-host, a man who has started ending every sentence with the word Kupo.
Tim Longo. No, Kupo? I haven't. But yeah, I think it might happen by the end of all of this.
It might happen. Andrew Kirmse, a friend of ours going back to our Starfighter days, actually occasionally will just say Kupo to me in the middle of the conversation.
Are you serious?
Yes, he will.
I cannot.
He actually will do that.
That's so, knowing Andrew, that is so funny. I cannot imagine him.
It is. He is also a big fan of this game. So,
oh, really?
Andrew, if you're out there listening, yes, he is.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The plot thickens.
I know. Maybe it's a programmer game. I don't know.
No, it's growing on me. I mean, we can talk more about it, but yeah, it's growing on me.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a moment. In a bit of sad Starfighter-related news, I wanted to pass along to our listeners some sad news about the death of a colleague we had back at LucasArts in the Starfighter and Jedi Starfighter era. Clarence Johnson, who was an art guy, made 3D models for us, tons of ships, lots of the pirate ships I think he made, and I remember he made like the Scarab fighter or whatever that thing was. I remember him being an especially quick moving artist. He would just model these like 100,000 poly models and then use them as the basis for, texturing a low poly model, and he could do that very, very quickly, impressively so. So it's sad to see him go. I hadn't seen him in some time. He had kind of gone a little bit into sort of the sort of Silicon Valley .com boom with a place called There.com
that's right.
a while back. Yeah, and then I think he ended up at Secret Level and Sega, which did things like Golden Axe and Iron Man and other stuff. So. I will always remember his big smile and his very, very colorful shirts.
Yeah,
he was a fun guy to work with.
Yeah, he was good. And I hadn't seen him in a long, long, long time. So, yeah, definitely sad news, but very, very well remembered fellow.
Yeah. Well, hats off to you, Clarence. I know you're teaching somebody how to dress better somewhere. But with that, I guess we'll move on to Final Fantasy itself. A place where people wear a lot of colorful clothing, so maybe a good segue there.
Isn't there Clarence in one of the games, a main character, or one of the... No, am I misremembering that?
Not that I am aware of, but I haven't played them all.
Okay.
So
yeah, maybe it's a later one. Anyway, yeah, so here we go.
Yeah, how'd you find it coming back to it? I know you had a little bit of a rough start trying to get past that boss that you kind of were having trouble with last time.
Yeah, so I took a step back and kind of collected myself. And you had given me some good tips last episode, so I'd kind of refreshed my kind of thinking about things, and I actually reloaded. You and I had exchanged some texts, over the last couple of days, and I actually reloaded an older save because I'd gotten to the point where I could not get back into Lindblom. Is that what it is?
Lindblom, right?
And so I had missed one of the stores that would actually sell, pretty good gear, and I just kind of completely missed that, and also the synthesis shop. And so I lost some hours with that reload. I went from level 10 back to level 6 in doing that, but it ended up paying off for sure. And so I had vowed to myself to not get into that situation I had with that boss again. Right. And so I basically over-leveled and did a bit of grinding. So I went back, geared up, dug into all of the gear/ability combos, kind of min-maxing each character, turning all the appropriate gems on and off. I have a couple questions for you about that later. And then and then went out into the overworld, and before going into that grotto, just leveled up and got up to about level 10 before I even went in. And now that I've been min-maxing the gear and the abilities and did a bit of that grinding, I haven't had any trouble ever since. In fact, most battles are pretty carefree for me now, depending on who I have.
Yeah.
And then a couple...
Right, and that's kind of a strength and flaw of JRPGs. Like, I mean, you can early on just decide, I'm just going to power level, up to level 10 or whatever, when normally you would be encountering stuff as level 2. And from now on, you'll just be overpowered pretty much for the rest of the game. So that's something that can happen. That's both a weakness and a strength. Like, it's almost worth it just to do it, especially for a first time through, to make it that much easier. But I think you're going to come across battles that are more about things like ability choices or using eidolons appropriately, or paying attention to weaknesses or all those sorts of things. And that stuff's going to kind of, as you develop as into somebody who's kind of more up on what's going on with your tactical choices, that'll kind of come up.
And I'm getting to know that stuff. I mean, I'm the one of my notes I wrote down is sort of the vocabulary of it all, and something that's we talked a little bit about last episode, but is dawning on me is that I just don't have the vocabulary for JRPGs, and it kind of started to make me think about my experiences with Western RPGs and how and what vocabulary and systems and kind of assumptions I've built up over the years from playing back, in the 80s, and these things that I take for granted as a Western RPG player that probably the game developers take for granted as well most of the time too. And not having played the JRPGs up to this point, I just don't have that stable knowledge coming in where there's some opaque stuff in this game when it comes to all of these systems, and I can totally see if you're playing the 9th version of these and they're assuming you've played some of the previous ones, they're just not going to hold your hand on certain things.
I think in particular for this one, there might have been an expectation that you had played 7 or 8. Because it is most like those, for sure. I mean, there are definitely some strengths this has. I think there's a party going
did
over
you hear
at
that?
Longest.
Man,
I did.
They're watching.
They're laughing up there.
They're watching, TV.
Oh, okay. There are some things that I really dislike about 8 among its main character. But one thing that's particularly frustrating is that you have these summons that you do of eidolons that we'll get to, and they're like unskippable in Final Fantasy VIII. They have these long animations as they're introduced every time, and you get to the point where you're like, I don't want to use those because I don't want to wait and watch this movie every single time I do these. And spells and things like that. So it's really, really awful. But no, I mean, generally speaking, they have a very sort of similar feel, and the battle systems are pretty similar, I would say. This feels a little bit more time sensitive, I guess, than 7 or 8 did. I feel like in 7 or 8, everybody takes their turn. This feels more like you want to take your turn a little more quickly, because otherwise the monsters will, make their decisions and be able to act before you get an attack in.
Yeah, I'm really mixed on that. It's the active battle system or whatever, active tactical battle. I forget what the acronym is, but yeah, I'm mixed on it. It's interesting, and I think it's growing on me. But the weird hybrid of almost, there's a little Counter-Strike in there, in that you kind of memorize essentially the keystrokes to get to the spell that you want. You know what I mean? Right. While the other bars are filling and stuff. So it's kind of this bit of menu diving on a timer, which I generally don't like most of the time. But it's growing on me now. I think there definitely are some tactics in there, and it's interesting, kind of forcing me to make some different decisions about who to use when. And I've even caught myself, and I don't know if this was their intention or not, but if I know somebody is about to use, say, a potion on somebody else, I actually might wait for the timer rather than having that the person who's ready to go execute on the moment that they're ready, it actually wait for the other person to go, and then kind of, you know what I mean? So like, for instance, a Phoenix down and then a potion, and I have two different people doing it, and then wait for the Phoenix down to happen, even though the potion person could have gone already. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and actually I find myself very often, waiting for the monster to attack again before I cast a cure or use a potion.
That's good, yeah.
Just because I want to see, okay, that person hit, the mob hit this, this character I was already going to cure, or he did even worse damage to somebody else, to kind of use that entry into battle the best way I can, as efficiently as I can.
Yeah.
It's funny because I actually tend to like time-based activity a little bit more in JRPGs. I don't particularly like Kingdom Hearts as a game, but I do kind of like the fact that I'm in there actually swinging a sword around. It's a little bit more action RPG. And playing Final Fantasy XIII, which I dove into a little bit this week, that has a very... you're only controlling one character, and it's much more direct. It is still kind of menu-based. It has some helper stuff to kind of automatically battle for you if you want to make sort of what would normally be random battles, to make those go just a little bit more quickly. It'll just do it for you, which you can actually do in Final Fantasy IX as well. I don't know if you've noticed that.
No, what do you
hit.
Oh, the auto?
Yes, you can hit the. You can hit the right shoulder, and it will just auto battle for you. And a lot of the Final Fantasies have that to just kind of. You can just kind of watch the combat. If it's your party is facing something that's not a challenge. Right. You can just kind of let it go. I do remember even the first time playing that I would occasionally, just like when I couldn't find where I was going on the overworld, I would end up fighting the same creatures over and over again, and I would end up just at some point hitting that button and just letting them fight and healing them after if they needed to, and just moving on. But
I probably should use that more now that I think about it. There's definitely, I have some of those battles going on. I don't think I'm probably not completely unfairly over leveled. I think I'm comfortable. You know what I mean? So I didn't want to go too far with that. So I think I'm kind of right on the cusp in a good way. So there's been a couple battles that I've missed, and to your point about kind of the puzzly aspect to some of the counters and the rock paper scissors and the elemental stuff. Those are still fun to figure out and try to deep dive. And I've noticed as I'm kind of assessing the gear more and more and picking up, I have a lot of gear obviously by this point, that I'm trying to read each description to see, which ones have bonuses to defense against a certain element and which ones have bonus to attack, a certain type of element and stuff. So,
right,
and I actually printed out, I took a picture. I took a picture of the screen for the Kupo help on the elemental, rock, paper, scissors. Right,
the Moogle.
Moogles. And then I took a picture on my phone, and then I printed that picture out. And so I have it sitting on my desk as I'm playing. It's like, wait, which one? What's the one thing? Which one's effective against the flying creatures, etc. Because I would never be able to remember that, and I already can't remember all of the bad effects, the negative effects. Which potions, so I have to constantly do the help on that stuff. So, but those are examples of the vocabulary I'm talking about.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that's exactly it. From playing them so long, I just know, I mean, a lot of the names are suggestive, like
a lot of them are fine.
Echo Screen. Right, yeah. Echo Screen is kind of obvious, but anointment is not. Like, what is anointment? Oh, it cures trouble. Yeah. Oh, of course, right, yeah.
Remedy.
And then you have, remedy, which is kind of the cure-all, as I recall.
Seems
or it heals multiple effects,
It says multiple effects, but doesn't really tell you which ones.
I think it's all of them. That's what I recall of remedy. Yeah. That's just that's an all-purpose. I mean, they're expensive, so you don't want to use them unless you're kind of in trouble. I generally, whenever I go into a store and it has some new, healing of some kind, a new, I don't know even what you'd call that, but a new anti-debuff.
Cure or something.
debuff cure. I would, I buy a half dozen of them or something just to make sure that I have them.
As typical in RPGs, I have a system now of numbers that I keep my stocks that, based on importance and rarity. I keep a certain number of each thing every time I go to the shop, which I generally haven't been hurting for money. I think, to your point last episode, that I started off, with a good bank full because of that sword fighting thing. But then since then, I've definitely spent all my money at this point, but I haven't been hurting.
Yeah, I feel like, in these games, you're not often really desperate for money. At least certainly this sort of PlayStation 1 era. I have been finding in 13 that I never have enough money, which is a really strange sensation for me. And I'm still pretty early in that game, so I feel like that's going to open up a little bit later as sort of greater gear becomes available in shops and things like that. It also just has a very different feel for all of that stuff. We're not really here to compare the two, but it has been interesting, going back to another one. I just really got the Jones to play a new Final Fantasy, or a new to me Final Fantasy after I played some more 9. And I went in and dumped, a dozen hours in Final Fantasy 13.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Oh, man, it's just these, my playtime is limited, as we talked about last, every episode probably. And it's just these are huge games, clearly. And when I got an inkling, in this episode, we'll talk about kind of the continent stuff, I'm sure, later on. But I had an inkling at some point where probably this wasn't the only continent in the game. And I was like, oh crap, that could mean so many things. And then now that we're on the other continent, it's like, not to jump ahead, but it's like, oh my God, look how many other land masses there are. No wonder this is a 50-hour game or something. So,
right. And they're all like that. I mean, every single JRPG I've ever played has just like a huge amount of space to cover. And usually a point later in the game where you can kind of freely move about them. You can go anywhere again. And usually that, and sometimes you have to, because you need to talk to a bunch of different people to gear up for your final battle. And sometimes you don't, sometimes it's just an option, to give you, you can go back and grind for stuff you couldn't find or, whatever. So you often have those opportunities.
That's good to know. I mean, I play the Skyrims and the Witchers of the world, so I shouldn't complain, about those sorts of big worlds. I think that I've been trying to put my finger on the difference for me though, and I think it is the, I guess the gating combined with the random battles, and the kind of different, again, I will definitely say the game is growing on me, and I'm liking it with each session more and more. There just is something still very foreign and weird to me with this game, and I assume it's with any JRPG. Specifically, like I mentioned last time, this weird merging of genres with this battle system, and then when you're controlling one character, running around dungeons or towns or something, they're kind of this little mini point and click adventure kind of thing. And it's just so crazy. I don't know. I've been having a hard time with it. And then the other cool thing that part of what's growing on me, and I mentioned a little bit last time, but wasn't really able to vocalize it well, I think is this, like, they're not afraid to do these one-off moments that are essentially, I assume, hand programmed. It's like, oh, whoever it is, Sakaguchi or somebody on the, one of the designers or developers saying, I want to do this thing. And so they just custom make it, just got this sense, this old school sense of they can afford to do that. And that's not something we do as much anymore, right? There's one sequence devoted to swinging a cage back and forth.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, what the notes that I made was, that this is a game that takes time to dance. In the case of being in the temple in Clara, You know, they're there and they have this like
Yeah,
Irish
I could
dance.
not believe
And
it. When I was watching that, I was just like,
you know, it's not minutes long. It's probably 30 seconds or whatever. But I mean, they go and it's even orchestrated, right? It's not just they all dance and do the same animation. It's like a couple of them dance and do they're kind of doing
well done. Yeah.
typical Irish dancing. It's very well done. And you're like, you're sitting there watching it and I just kind of get lost in those sorts of things. You know, they really make the thing come alive to me, even with the technical limitations of the time, right? I mean, they are all basically playing the same animation at some point, which they would have had to do for performance and storage reasons. But, you know, on the other hand, if you go watch a dance scene in any, you know, period piece, they're all doing the same thing too, right? So it's not like it's out of place even, you know, it is just kind of funny.
And I applaud them.
I
definitely applaud them for that kind of stuff. Like every time one of those happens, my mouth is a little open, you know, and kind of aghast at kind of the motivation to do it and to stick to it and to carry it through, and it kind of tells me why it takes so long maybe for them to make these games as well. But there is an economy to, if you just take the animations and the emotes that each of the characters do, if you pay attention, you can see what they're in the repetition and the stuff that they're using. Right. But they just, you know, in the kind of old school, the days when that kind of stuff needed to be economical, when, you know, as you made it on those sorts of the older platforms, they use their economy of that development cycle, you know, of those development assets really well. And they spread it out nicely and they kind of mix it up, you know, and there's certain, like Freya has this one animation, for instance, where she's sort of contemplative, where she kind of puts her arm up and then puts her chin on her hand. And they use that, you know, half a dozen times for her. And even though you see it multiple times, it's pretty effective for its era, for this little moment with a character and it gives you a kind of a nice sense of her character at the same time while still being.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, it is sort of like the economy of the little Hitman videos like we talked about, you know, with Hitman 2. You know, a very small amount of development effort, but carrying a lot of character development weight that really sets them apart. They're not all doing the same
More
thing.
With less,
for sure.
And I think it's something that I struggle with in modern day development, and I think modern day developers struggle with now, because we have so much fidelity and we have so much control over so many things, but we definitely could do a better job at doing more with less, you know.
Right. And I wonder, and this is purely cultural, no problem. This is purely sort of cultural ignorance, but I wonder if there's an influence there from like Japanese theater or or whatever, where, or even the sort of Eastern puppet, you know, paper puppet making, you know, where you have sort of these sort of abstractions of character that have to convey a lot, you know, with very little. You know, like they don't even have proper facial expressions, right? Because they have these masks, you know, so they have to do a lot with body movement, but it's still sort of stylized. So you kind of have to, like, I just have this kind of impression in my brain that it must come from something like that, you know, to characterize that way. Which I think is really effective. I mean, you're a theater guy, so you probably have more insight into something like that.
No, you're right. I mean, I studied both No and Kabuki in theater, and that's definitely their sort of aesthetic, and I can definitely see that here as well. Kind of on the flip side of this, the other thing that I think is growing on me, you asked me the question last episode of, I guess, the tone. What did it catch me off guard, or how am I responding to the tone of it? And it's definitely washing over me differently than the initial. I think my frustrations in the initial session kind of overpowered any of that. But I'm getting this kind of,
sure.
You know, we talked a little bit about Miyazaki. There's a little Disney. There's just a fairy tale element to this now, and I have no basis of comparison for any of the other Final Fantasies or any other JRPG, so I don't know how often this occurs, this kind of tonal shift. But other than playing Ni no Kuni, you know, probably about 5 or 6 hours of Ni no Kuni, and so I see similarities there, and I definitely appreciate that, because they have stayed really consistent with that feel, you know. and the character design and just the playfulness. But then there's always this weird, darker undertone to a lot of the themes of what's going on. And some pretty rough scenes that I'm kind of surprised are placed within this tone of a game.
Yeah, I know. It is so charming much of the time that when, a scene that sets what the stakes are comes along, it is really kind of gutting just how bad things are. And maybe we should go ahead and dig into that. The big sort of reveal at this stage of the game is that Garnet / Dagger is revealed to have this genetic tie to these Eidolon creatures, and the Eidolons have been removed from her so that her mother, the queen, can use them to basically try to take over the world. And what ensues after she gains control of two Eidolons is the destruction of one whole town in this beautiful tree, and then a fair amount of damage to a very large city in Lindblom. And the Clara one in particular gutted me all over again because it totally destroys this tree where you've just had all these people that you saved, and you brought them up to this temple, and there were some people you couldn't save along the way, and that was sad. But, then they all kind of gave you stuff to help you out if you talked to them. I don't know if you did. Before you went out and had this little fight, and then you escaped, and then all hell broke loose, and she called down an Eidolon to just destroy it utterly. And it was, I knew that was coming, and it still hit me kind of hard, and it's a pre-rendered cutscene. It's done very well. It's still kind of abstract in the sense that, it's very kind of anime feeling in the sense that, it's like, oh, focus on a character with kind of not a lot in the background, but it's moving really fast in the case of the Eidolon. And then just utter destruction, like something you'd see in Akira or something like that.
Yeah.
So pretty wild.
Yeah, and that tree town, I made a note that I wanted to bring up just from an art design and art direction perspective. And we talked a little bit about last week with the enemy designs, but they're just another sort of foreign thing to me is just, this concept of a tree, this lush, beautiful tree town that's surrounded by a sandstorm in the middle of a desert. But then they have this, water. They're using, I think, some of the sandstorm to pump water up through the tree. Like these ideas all merged together in really interesting ways that just you don't get in a lot of Western RPGs or really Western fantasy of any kind, right? Like and it's probably cultural to some degree and what have you, but they're really unique, and for, at least for me, yes. Because like I said, I've been so ingrained into goblins and orcs and Tolkien, that's kind of like, that's where the band of creativity is for me, but these are just going, and so it's been hard for me to sort of culturally adjust. It's sort of like a mini culture shock, not to overstate it and like be over dramatic about it, but right. And some of the character designs bounce off of me too, and in that they don't resonate with me, or the first time I've seen something that just kind of seems goofy. Too goofy,
right? Like Queen.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of her, my first time through, when I went to the grotto, I had not gone to the swamp, and so I only had 3 characters at that boss fight in the grotto. And then the second time, I actually explored the overworld more and found her and was able to get her. We didn't talk about that last time, but she was in my 4th in that grotto battle, so I had an actual extra character.
Oh wow, yeah, I didn't have that.
Oh, okay. So yeah, well, I mean,
you don't have to go. You can go to the swamp, I guess, out of order, and of course you need to go there later. So I just kind of went there along my way.
Yeah,
But I had already invested in weapons and things like that, so that I was quite powerful when I get there. It's interesting to me though, because you know what level you are. Yeah. I have no idea. I don't even care.
Well, that's good. So, that's good on them then.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of I'm either up to the challenge or I'm not, and the levels are kind of what a level change for me is really just an opportunity to go and say, okay, do I have enough gems, or have I gained an ability? Do I need to reassess what equipment I'm using and things like that? They're more like player decision points for me than they are about any sense of progress. And I think for me, that's because the characters are separate from me.
Yeah.
Right. So because they're their own people who have this story that they're going to have, and, who knows what's going to happen at the end of it, but they might go on their merry way. Because they are separate that way, I'm not really invested in the sort of, the things that I would normally be invested in an RPG, in a Western RPG.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if it's just me, because I know roughly what levels my characters are, but of course I don't ever know what level the enemies are at, right? They don't have health bars or anything to tell me how well I'm doing, which is a frustration for me as well. And unless I just haven't found an ability to tell me that stuff. I guess maybe the level, sort of how much I'm paying attention to the level is just kind of my own training of caring about, because I'm an RPG min-maxer at heart. I have become that over my life, and so I think I'm looking at that stuff probably more than I need to, because it is a very linear game for the most part, right? Like, at least for the big beats, I can go into the overworld as long as I like, but for the big beats, I'm going to hit the same things in roughly the same order, with I guess the exception of the swamp thing that I did. And I also went to Chocobo Forest at that same time early on to do that kind of stuff, and got my Chocobo and stuff just because.
Yeah, and I haven't done any of that.
I just figured I would. I just found it, and I was like, oh, I'll do this now before I go into the grotto, because I was grinding. So I haven't really used the Chocobo much since then, though. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
It's cool that they let you do that stuff, though. And
it is. That's great. It is. And I think actually, playing it again, I mean, part of it is kind of playing it on a deadline, and also having played way too many games this past week or so. I've been having some carpal tunnel, so I was kind of rushing through the game a little bit yesterday, and not kind of going and seeing the sights. I'm also just not a fan of the overworld, just because it is, compared to everything else, it just hasn't aged well. Because they had longer draw distances and things like that. It's a very different system, right? It just looks. It's all made in 3D, and, when you had 1,000 polygons for the environment, it's just not going to look that good. When you're in a town and it's just a picture of an environment with walk boxes, that's a lot easier. And you could just make it exactly what you want it to be. But yeah, it just has not aged well. And so I just don't spend time there, as a result, unless I get lost. Yeah. Which does happen. I got a little lost trying to find my way to, the Black Mage Village, but we'll get to that later on. Why don't we take a quick break?
Okay.
Welcome back to this second segment of our second episode is exploring Final Fantasy IX. I think here in the second half we're going to kind of dig through some of the themes and maybe the story beats to tie into those themes. To kick us off, I wanted to go back to some stuff we talked about from last time, which is just the heavy hand of Shakespeare in this work. And in particular, when we see Kuja again, we saw him for the first time, or in theory, we should have seen him for the first time at the end of last episode, when he takes flight with his dragon. Mm-hmm. But this time we see him, and we kind of learn who he is through Sid and stuff. But when he actually meets with the Queen, and Garnet is there, he basically gives a speech that is very much like all the world's a stage. And we are merely poor players. I mean, it's not that word for word by any means, but it has exactly that feel.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't catch that. Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, I mean, there are many moments. I mean, we mentioned the step dancing earlier as well. There are many moments in this game when I feel like I'm watching stage play, theater of some kind. It's very theatrical. I guess kind of compositionally, I assume that most like 7 and 8 are this way as well because they probably have pre-rendered static backgrounds. But there's this sense of to overuse theater terms, that proscenium kind of feel where things are kind of presented to you in a grand kind of theatrical way in the angles that they're choosing with the cameras and stuff, and things are really and so I'm probably overanalyzing this, but it feels very theatrical to me, especially kind of in the, I don't know, Disney sense, when you see a musical or a Disney stage, performance at the park or something like that, where it's just there's fireworks going off everywhere, and everyone's gesticulating, very, very... Or
even just, Frozen from a couple of years ago. Like, I mean, it's even in the movies, right? I mean, it's just like, that scene where she sings the big song or whatever. And there's just like basically fireworks made out of ice everywhere. I mean, it's pretty impressive stuff.
Oh, and I didn't mention last time, and I definitely want to mention it this time. I think the music is great generally.
Oh yeah, I had a note to mention that, to ask what you thought.
Yeah, it's especially like some ones that I took specific notes on. Anytime Beatrix is around, I feel like the music really fits well there. I am another smaller example is I recently met a random encounter enemy in the overworld that I think was like a ladybug derivative, but the music was different for her, I will say, or it. And she wanted ore rather than to fight. She wanted
I ran into the same one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so perfect use of music, because as soon as that music changed, even though the interface and the combat, mechanics were all the same, I knew that something, that I didn't necessarily need to fight her. I don't know what would happen if you actually just fought her and killed her. That probably would, you could probably do that. But I decided to give her ore, and then she said, see you later. But
the ore is effectively useless for you. I think it does, it gives you 10 or 15 hit points back or something like that. It's pointless to use it.
I haven't used it yet because I thought it was going to be super effective, so I was hoarding it all. So that doesn't even help me. Huh? Okay.
No, it didn't. Well, I used it once, and I was like,
useless.
What? Yeah, what was that for? Yeah. So it's yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's been multiple moments, and I think every town has a pretty cool theme, and it fits within the tone of things. So yeah, really, really specific, really, really nice music. And I forget his name, but I think pretty legendary composer anyway, right across the Square games.
It's is it Nomura?
I was going to say Nomura, as well.
Yeah, I think that's his name.
Wasn't sure. Yeah, so I mean, I guess getting into some of the story themes and the story stuff, I missed those. Oh, and then you had a second
Tetsuya Nomura.
Yeah. You had a second Shakespeare or theatrical mention.
Right, and the other one that was kind of directly on the nose, even from kind of the characterization, was Puck, the prince of the king of Premonition, his son, I guess. He's very puckish.
Yeah,
he kind of draws the characters into a combat they might not otherwise engage in, and then he kind of shows up and gives some history on what's going on with a character, and then just kind of says, "Oh yeah, hi dad, bye dad," and kind of disappears off the stage again. So it is very he's another direct, obvious tie. They're too there to be coincidental for sure.
Yeah, and I actually
even thought maybe Zidane might be the Dane.
Are you kidding me? If that is the case, I'll give him some cred on that one. That's interesting.
I don't know, because he's so anti He's so anti-Hamlet. I mean, he's not Hamlet at all.
He could be a much younger Hamlet. He's not he's not
the young
brooding
one who was born on the back of York.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, they talk about, anyway, we're getting pretty into the weeds here, but they talk about, before the brooding happened, or began. So,
right.
So maybe, and me comparing him to Bieber would fit a little bit too in Bieber's arc to become Hamlet someday.
Oh my God, you know entirely too much about Bieber.
Listen, I have a 13-year-old daughter. I know she hates Bieber, by the way, but I think my wife and daughter just like making fun of him, so he comes up more than I'd like.
Let's dive into some other themes.
Yeah, I think we were talking in the break. One of the kind of general points I wanted to make before getting into specific themes is just as the plot and story is kind of moving forward, I'm getting a bit of a disjointed feel about things. I think I've been trying to put my finger on what it is. I think it's a combination of probably too many characters and too many subplots kind of happening and kind of switching around, and then I got to hand it to him that it's cool that they have so many different types of storytelling devices. They've introduced flashbacks at this point. They have the active time event. I keep forgetting what the acronym is for that, but
that's it. It's ATE.
Okay, yeah, the simultaneous storytelling, which is clever, and I actually like that they're still doing that. So they're merging a lot of different timelines and characters and states of characters, and obviously sometimes they'll use different names for different characters, like the princess and stuff. And so you have to kind of remember who's who. And that one's an easy one, but and so I'm kind of losing track of a lot of the threads other than the big beats of the story plot, the the macro ones of and you mentioned
sort of big political situation.
Yeah.
Basically.
And you mentioned in the break kind of that, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and whatever that saying is. And that's obviously a big theme with the queen and kind of her going overboard. Though I have a theory that maybe there's more to that. I'm kind of hoping maybe it's not as simple as just the queen has become hungry with power, but her character, even visual design, her visual design kind of could justify that, I guess. But I kind of was hoping there's more to that. And then and while you were away at break, I thought about one possible theory about why the disjointedness is kind of rubbing me the wrong way. And I think in my preconceived notions for RPGs in general, and because I'm pretty OCD overall, and I tend to be a completionist, and I'm do every quest I can get my hands on. Because it's a linear game, and there aren't really quests. You don't get XP for quests; you only get XP for combat. And because there's not a distinction between primary quests and secondary quests, they're just kind of all washed together. I actually can't. Like, there's this whole subplot with Freya and Sir Flatley, which I thought was kind of interesting, but it kind of came out of nowhere and then kind of left very abruptly when he showed up.
You actually get another storytelling device from Freya with that. You basically get, without actually having voice, you do kind of get a voiceover.
That's right. They have
text,
the voice. Yeah. They use that a few times where the screen goes dark and then they have this like voiceover or like maybe an internal monologue or something.
Right.
But because all of the story elements, which essentially you could say are different quests in a way or different subplots, they're all kind of linearly woven together. So I have a hard time parsing importance, which ones I need to pay attention to and which ones I don't really need to. So I kind of just feel that I approach it as if everything is important, and I probably don't need to do that or shouldn't. But my point about Western RPGs is that secondary quests because they're called that, primary quests because they're called that. And if I don't care about that secondary stuff, I just won't do it, but at least I know its status in the list of important things to worry about. Right. So anyway, a small theory there on why it's rubbing me the wrong way. However, on the flip side, to play devil's advocate with myself, there is a delightfulness to being surprised. Because there's always some crazy stuff going on. Like I feel like at least every half hour or something, like I'm I just cannot believe what I'm watching. and
Yes.
And I'm sure that's partly why people love this series or this genre is they're just the wackiness of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that especially 7 and 8 were not nearly. I mean, they had somewhat wacky elements, and they did have a lot of, sort of. It was hard to know in the same way what was the most important stuff, but I don't feel they were anywhere near as off the wall as this one is.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so this is pretty focused on this one, then, you think?
I feel that way. I mean, I played 7 and 8 fairly recently. In the last 5 years, I actually went back and played them. I never played them before 9. Like I said, this was my first one. So I played 9 and then 10 and 12 and 10-2.
Interesting.
And some other stuff. And then I a few years ago played 7 and 8, and I don't remember them having nearly as much of this kind of very off the wall stuff. I mean, there was kind of an off the wall. There were some strange characters, I will say, but they weren't. Even then, they weren't as strange. Nothing as strange as Quina or Quina, who is one of the Q or Crew, who are these apparently identical, pasty face, tongue, wagging,
crazy
characters who will eat enemies. That's her special ability.
I still haven't been successful at doing that. I haven't figured out the rule set for that.
Well, I haven't either. It's basically getting a creature down to a certain percentage of health.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's entirely kind of a timing thing, and if you really want to do it, you can kind of work towards it. It's sort of similar to the trance in that way. Like another thing about the random battles is trance is really hard to control. However, you can actually, if you've gone and you failed in a big battle, you can actually go and grind. If you restore from the save, you can go and grind until your trance is almost there because you're going to get it all the way there once you go to that boss battle. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. It's just in the context of a single battle.
Yeah, I thought about that, about doing that a couple of times, especially for that grotto battle. So I definitely will revisit that strategy and see. Yeah, she's a blue mage. Like, is that a thing? Because it seems like in the character sheet when you're picking her abilities during combat, it'll have black magic, white magic for Vivian and Dagger, and then for hers it says blue magic. So is she is that kind of mage in other Final Fantasies?
I feel like there's blue magic in other Final Fantasies, but I don't feel like it's acquired the same way. I feel like it's just another type of magic. Here it's definitely it's whatever she can eat.
Yeah. She's got forks.
Her weapon's a fork.
Weapons.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's just weird.
Couldn't believe the whole frog thing.
It's very off the wall. Like, and I don't remember anything, especially in 8. I don't remember anything remotely that crazy.
It's interesting. Okay, well that's good to know that there's. I mean, for you playing, I can imagine now for you playing this one first and then going through the rest of the games. It's an interesting way to start the series because it's such a specific. Like you made the analogy, I think, to Wind Waker. Last episode, which I think is maybe a similar kind of thing. If that was actually your someone's first Zelda, it gives you an interesting starting off point for a franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's. I mean, part of it's the art stuff, but it's not even the art stuff. I think it is a lot of just the really off the wall. Like, I don't know how many Japanese games I had even played before I played this game.
Yeah.
And I played this, and this was like, oh, this is what they mean when they talk about Japanese games. I mean, that's basically what my reaction was.
Yeah. Well, my obsession is Metal Gear. And,
I know.
So, in fact, I want to dig out those old blog posts that I did a long time ago about those. But, I mean, I can, not that they're that similar, really, but as far as, like, cultural differences and kind of the the openness that they have to just going crazy with stuff. And maybe it's just these specific creators, but I don't think so. I think there's cultural aspects to it as well that we'll probably just never quite understand.
Right. I mean, we went to a talk at GDC once about that rhythm game, something Ouendan. I don't even remember the English title, and I'll try to think of it. But it's, the discussion was about sort of the cultural difference between Japan and the West as being, a difference between a hot culture and a cool culture. And I sort of feel like that's kind of what's going on here. It was called Osu Tatakae Ouendan.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I don't remember what it was called in the U.S. Oh, it was Elite Beat Agents in the U.S. Yeah. A game that I actually really enjoyed, but it's been years since I played it. And the designer or director or whatever of that, talked about that and talked about how in Japanese culture they have like cheerleading things, like when people go to a theater and they have like cheerleading as a thing that people go watch, and instead of just kind of a thing that happens in the middle of something else. And that was just really wild to me. And it was very, it's a very kind of different sort of energetic. Whereas, in the West, our culture tends to be cooler, and more distanced, in a way, is what we seek out. And I think that, embracing that hot weirdness is kind of what creators feel encouraged to do. Like, I mean, that's what happens with Suda 51. Like, you play his games, no more heroes or, whatever. Or you play, the guy who made Deadly Premonition, same thing.
That's Swery. Is it? That's
Swery. Yeah, Swery 65. Yeah. And as you mentioned, Kojima and, the people various people who've worked on Final Fantasy, but here Sakaguchi, I think that's a large part of what makes them so distinct.
Yeah. And it's funny to talk to friends who are big JRPG fans or just Japanese game fans in general. The interesting thing about the kind of localization challenge of this, in my opinion, because they've obviously gotten better and better. And as I'm playing this game, I'm constantly, for whatever reason, thinking about localization and the translation challenges of that, kind of because there's a lot of crazy stuff in this game, and same problem for Metal Gear games as well. But the fans, the Western audience fans that love this stuff, love these games for different reasons than the actual Japanese public does, because it's almost like, because we don't have the same foundation,
right.
And to your point, they're Japanese, they live it. And so they're pulling, a number one Japanese RPG in Japan is number one because everyone's on the same page, for the most part. A number one over here has different connotations because it's foreign, and just kind of so different and refreshing, and delightful. And for me, Metal Gear, like, I can't, not to get on a tangent here, but I can't necessarily defend the crazy story and the long cutscenes in a Metal Gear game, but I love them because I can't get that anywhere else in in Western games, right? Sure. All the Western stories and game stories, kind of the merger of that stuff is, it's all pretty much what you would expect, right? Very, very driven by Hollywood movies and, and to your point, that kind of cool cultural feel and very proper kind of way of approaching things versus Metal Gear, which there's no holds barred.
Yeah, I was going to say he's a guy with no filter.
Yeah, and I love it, and I'm not even sure why, it's just nice to have somebody in a genre that I like do something risky, even though to him it's probably not risky.
Right. Pulling back to the game, the other couple of themes that we had talked about, and we're not really kind of hitting story points here. For people playing along, you're going to pick up this stuff as you're playing as well. So we're not going to kind of beat for beat talk about them as they happen, but more kind of grab onto the themes. I think as bigger revelations come along in this next section, as I recall, that we're going to play for next time, there is at least one really big event. And maybe two, so we'll see how that goes. But the other one was obviously a question of the sort of the black mages as slaves, and also to a certain sense, people who are not in power being slaves to duty. I think kind of ties in with that a little bit, because you look at somebody like Steiner, who admittedly is not all that bright, and he, at the same time, he's somebody who's saying, trust the queen. She must have her reasons. He's willing to just go along with everything because, that's his job, right? I mean, it's because he's basically, a peon, and his bond is pledged to somebody, and Beatrix is working much the same way.
And it's funny because, the first session you had given the goal to fight up until to play up until the Beatrix encounter, which of course I didn't make it on the first session, but I obviously finally did. And so she had been, for whatever dumb reason, she'd been built up into my head as this, significant figure, significant enemy. And the battles were fun, and she's a badass and all of that. And then because I think if you hadn't set that goal ahead of time, I wouldn't have seen her coming, I wouldn't have built her up in my head as much. So when she started to actually, turn to the kind of good side, if you will, I was actually more excited than I think I maybe normally would have been, because I was like, she's starting to question things, and oh my gosh, she's going to join us. And she is a badass. I mean, getting to, a minorly brilliant move of getting to actually control her and then pair her with Freya, sort of like the double whammy. And then you start to be able to toy with some of those amazingly powerful spells and stuff.
Right. And it's interesting because at the same time you're seeing how power corrupted, Bronny, or whatever her name is, the queen. You're getting a taste of real power yourself as a player.
Yeah.
At exactly that moment, like that you've seen, oh my God, this woman's so twisted. She's going to kill her own daughter. And she's already done this terrible thing to her with those two jesters. And now she's she's trying, Beatrix is basically goes and like, oh my God, I didn't sign up for this. She finally kind of shakes out of, her, I don't know, she shakes off her chains, I guess, and she decides to act on her own. And then you as a player get a taste of what that power is like, which also comes along in this chunk of play by getting, control of an Eidolon, our first in Rama, the sort of thunder god, who is, I guess you get his powers from a peridot, which is or peridot, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, a little gem that you can equip as an accessory, I guess, and get his Eidolon to be able to summon him. Hold on to those peridots. I think they power his attacks.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've gotten multiple ones. Yeah,
I know. You get them and you're like, well, I already have one of these. Why would I need more? And I think it's a good idea to hold on to them.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, funny enough, because I'm such a min-maxer, Garnet has some other item in her accessory slot right now that I don't want to stop leveling up. So I actually haven't swapped that out yet to use him in any battles because I want to finish leveling that other ability up.
You're right. Yeah.
For whatever reason.
Yeah. Well, and that's what kind of happens is you end up touching on the combat and the random battles and stuff, you end up going, oh, I've got this thing. I want to make sure, like, you start swapping things out because, like, okay, I definitely want to get that. I want to get this level up ability so I can get levels faster so that I can power up my abilities faster. Mm-hmm. So you're doing that. Even a Western RPG is the same sort of thing. Like, oh, I'm going to take this double XP power. If you're in a Fallout game or whatever, I'm going to get more XP from every encounter so that I can get those level ups faster so I can choose new perks or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's very similar kind of here, although the abilities are distinct from the levels. You can use more of them.
Right.
Which is, you had a question about that, you said, in the first half.
I'm still, I went through all the tutorials this time for sure, and made sure that I was fully, read up on things. When you have a gem activated in an ability, does that mean you are learning? That is the gem activation part of what you need to actually learn it, I assume. And
you do not.
You do not. So no. The gem is only whether you are going to have it available to you during combat? That's
right.
Okay, so if I'm wearing the item that has the ability attached to it, and I do not have a gem inside, then it will still level up.
That is correct.
Oh, okay. I had it backwards. I think I thought the gem was what was required for it to level up, and then once I had it leveled up, I could use it or not. The gem would actually. Right. Yeah, right. I see. Okay.
No, I frequently put things on because I'm like, I'm probably going to need this later. Even though I don't need it now. Like a lot of the ability prevention, the status prevention effects, you're not running into a lot of enemies that cast like Confusion or Petrify or something like that now. I think we've run into maybe one creature that casts Confusion the whole time. So it's kind of like, well, you don't really need Confusion. The anti-confusion ability, and you don't really need the anti-petrify jelly ability, so you can just kind of learn those and have them, and then later on in the game when you're fighting tougher things, you're going to run into those things. I mean, it's going to happen sooner or later that you start dying more. And you're going to start dying because you're running into status effects that are really terrible or attacks that are really hard to counter. We ran into a creature this time in one of the Gargant tunnels, which was basically a death dealer. I don't remember what it was called, but it was like this wheeled machinery that chased you through a hall and kind of an action sequence, right? That it was like Indy running away from the stone rolling down.
Couldn't believe it.
And then and there was these swinging pendulums that would slow you down, and then you'd have to fight it again and again and again, and it would cast like Death Level 5. And what Death Level 5 is, because you probably haven't encountered this before, it means if your level is a multiple of 5, then that character dies on that spell. I know, right?
What the heck?
Yeah.
That is ridiculous.
So there's a Death Level 3 and there's a Death Level 5. I don't remember if there's a Death Level 2. I do know at that point, I was like level 17, so I was like a very safe level because I'm a high prime number. Nothing was going to kill me with a death level spell.
Oh my gosh!
But yeah, that's a thing, and that I didn't even get that in this game at the time because I think the first time I encountered it, I was like, well, that's really weird. I'm way higher than level 5. No biggie. Right. I didn't kill anybody, right? And I didn't get it. And then later in the game, I encountered something that was a death level 3 caster or whatever, and it wiped my party. And I'm like, what the? Because I just, 3 of the 4 characters died, and I'm like, I can't. What? It is very confusing. And this was my first game for Final Fantasy stuff, so that was the first time I ran into that, and I didn't understand it.
I'm sure. If you hadn't told me, I don't think I would have gotten it. But
and later on, I got it more because in, I guess, Final Fantasy Tactics, there's like a character that has arithmancy or whatever, sort of a numbers-based combat, and it is stuff like that. And that's when I kind of like, oh, that's what it meant. You know, that's like when the penny dropped years later when I played Final Fantasy Tactics. Like, oh, here's a whole character that has spells that are based on what the enemy's levels are.
Yeah, it's pretty clever.
It is clever. That's unusual. You know, that's just the sort of like totally meta kind of attack. Like, oh, hey, this thing that's kind of not really part of the story, that's just how I'm going to kill you now.
Right.
You know,
well,
it's just
also
bizarre.
kind of it's. I mean, you know, no offense, but it's like a bit of a programmer joke in a way too, right? Like you can see a game developer coming up with that design or something.
Well, it's also the sort of thing that, you know, I like about. I mean, one of the things I like about Final Fantasy, you know, and JRPGs in general are these kind of many different axes. Like all their numbers seem to mean something, and they use all of those things in different ways, you know, and they all tie in different ways, and you know, it's like an ecosystem of numbers. You know, it's like, why have a number if it doesn't matter, right? I mean, and in this case, it's like, well, why would you have a number for a level? You could just get a level up, and it just means things happen, but you don't keep track of what that number is. But since we do keep track of what it is, why don't we do a thing with that? You know, why don't we make this special attack that kills you if you're some multiple?
Well, not only that, but I mean, you know what level you have, but it doesn't help you know anything really else about the game by knowing that number, as we talked about earlier, right? Because you don't know what level the enemies are. I mean, I guess, you know, hypothetically, in when this game came out, there were strategy guides and such, which people would find out that stuff. But playing the game, technically, you don't knowing what level your characters are. All it is a reinforcement that you're improving. So you're just seeing a number going up. There isn't any strategic. You know, and I'm not
sure if that changes because I don't know if you got the detect ability.
I think I've seen it maybe on some
right on some very low level item like one of the first daggers you can get detect, and what detect allows you to do is I think it tells you weaknesses maybe. Oh no, it tells you what they have if you're going to steal. But I feel like there's a more powerful form of detect that comes later that might tell you things like level and hit points and things like that. Like this is how bad it really is going to be, you know.
Well, that's cool. Then that's something that they hide behind an ability is makes it more meaningful.
Right.
When you get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember if this game specifically has that, but certainly other JRPGs have had it. I think like Dark Cloud, maybe the second one had that sort of thing. I've definitely seen it before.
An inspect kind of ability.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. And definitely, I think even Final Fantasy VII, I felt like had it, and Wild Arms 3. I mean, it's very common, and they all kind of reveal different stuff. And I think maybe this one just kind of split that out across multiple abilities. So
yeah. It's so funny. I mean, to jump kind of into a couple other quick topics. As I was talking about earlier, just kind of the weird kind of merger of a bunch of different experiences together. A couple of like game developer-y kind of notions that I wrote some notes down. For instance, it's super weird to me that they have the battle arenas for each of these sort of areas that you're in, and they're a lot of them, especially in the big moment, kind of linear moments, not in the overworld. They're custom for the area that you're in. So whether it's the dungeon or the castle or what have you. And it's just from a game development standpoint, it's crazy that they had to make these unique battle arenas for each of those, as well as the actual location that you're in, but in high res pre-rendered, you know.
Right, exactly.
It's just like all this, you know, it's almost like there's these different teams who are not talking together, you know, to each other enough or something like that. And just these interesting choices that and as I mentioned in the first episode, I'm so used to thinking from the perspective of, okay, we're going to make a system. We're going to make, we're going to make a certain level design sort of structure, right? And those are all going to merge together, and you're going to kind of reuse them and repurpose them, and they're all going to be in a systemic kind of simulation and emergent way, versus these kind of one-off experiences that are strung together. I don't know. It's just breaking my brain in a few different ways.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is kind of interesting to think, though. I mean, and to your point, the monsters are the same way.
Yeah, right.
Right. I mean, there's more monster reuse, and going forward, like I said, I've been playing Final Fantasy 13. You know, I'm already seeing just basically texture swaps for monsters in Final Fantasy 13 because that's a PS3 era game. You know, and the bar for content is so much higher and therefore more expensive. You know, back then it was okay. You know, 300 polys. You know, and maybe vertex coloring only, or maybe a 64 by 64 texture or something like that, right? I mean, just very, very simple, you know, amounts of polys that the PS1 could push. You know, it kind of necessitated to even make the battle spaces make sense. Like, they would have had to do all kinds of different sprites otherwise, right? I mean, it's different kinds of work, you know?
Yeah. And I get why, you know, they would come to this conclusion as far as how to make the game. And I guess you could probably assume, and maybe you can confirm this, some of the sort of experiences that they have, the paradigms that they have for these battle arenas and things like that are coming from previous, you know, 16-bit games anyway, right? So they had a rhythm and a pacing already established that they were going to go for. And so when they went to full 3D, they had to then solve the problem for, okay, now we're going to have a 3D arena and we have to make that custom, but it's going to have to be low poly, et cetera, et cetera. So I see where they get there. I guess it's just, it's one of those typical things where you have an old genre that has to grow up over time throughout different generations of, you know, and that's why, and it's interesting to hear you playing 13 now, right? Because it's so many years beyond this one, and yes, how they are or are not continuing certain things with a modern version of this game that was the first time they became 3D, you know, or you know, even just the pre-rendered backgrounds that I guess 7 was the first one they did, you know.
It's funny. I mean, the criticisms of 13 when it came out, as I recall them, because I didn't play the game at that time. I didn't even buy it then. I just bought it recently. A lot of it was a very like, it was all about how linear it was. And I'm like, have you not been playing these games for,
yeah, right, you
know, 15, 20 years? I mean, they're like this. Like, the Final Fantasy series has been like this for a while. And yeah, sometimes you can go out into the overworld and you can walk around and do whatever, but not really in a huge way. You know, and so it doesn't, like, going from 9 to 13 from that standpoint doesn't bother me in the least. What is amazing is, like, the impossible degree of spectacle that Final Fantasy 13 brings along with the power and the sort of, like, tackling each area on its own, just the same as this. It's the same format. It's like, oh, I got into a battle. Now I'm in a battle arena, which is kind of a generic version of the sort of actual space that you were in. Yeah. It's exactly the same.
Yeah, it's so weird.
It's a bizarre thing to stick with, because, like, I think Kingdom Hearts definitely departed from that. I don't remember. Maybe you went into battle mode, but they felt more like you were actually in the same place, the same actual location, as opposed to like a new thing. It's been a while since I played it, so I can't really remember that, but. But yeah, it is kind of a weird. It's definitely kind of a weird thing.
It's just I guess it's like, and again, this is my only one, so I don't have the same basis of comparison that you have. But it's almost like they're sticking to this tradition that somebody has said they have to stick to, or that they inherently stick to and don't even think about or care to change. And not to say that we don't do the same thing, in Western development, like we do. We're just as probably guilty of other things, of just sticking with tradition. I definitely would agree there, but I guess I just haven't had this perspective on this genre, and I guess me not having played any of them, maybe I'm seeing it with fresh eyes in it. So it's kind of pulling the stuff out that somebody who's been playing the series forever doesn't really care, to mention.
It definitely doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
But I definitely see it. Like, I do remember being like, wow, this is weird. Like, oh, now I go into this different camera mode, and I'm from the side, and now I'm in this active battle thing, and the camera kind of swirls around, and then at the end it plays the triumphal music and focuses on whoever got the last blow in. It's like this format, that it's gonna follow.
I'm hearing that friggin' battle music in my sleep now. By the way. Oh my god.
Yeah, that's why I used it as one of the interstitial cuts for the last podcast.
I think that's very appropriate.
All right, well, let's wrap it up there, take a quick break, and then come talk about next time.
Yep.
And we're back, and we just want to kind of have the round out, outro, tell people we're going to play next time, and give you the Twitter links and all that stuff. We've been trying to keep these to 4 episodes, and so for the next one, I think we want to go as far as Mount Gulug, which is kind of a weird name.
Shut up, really? Mount Gulug.
Gulug, yep. Gulug. I think it's this is a long time ago, so I'm thinking that's about right for the next one. And then I think, and one of the things that's kind of tough here at the end is that, the deeper you go into these games, you have like the same number of chapters will end up taking you longer just because, the combat gets more difficult, and you're kind of, especially for you, I'm a little worried about you kind of running up against, oh, I ran into this creature. Now what do I do? I can't beat it. And it's going to be, well, what does it cast? I don't know if you had this happen, but I had, Zidane was wearing some kind of accessory. I can't remember what it was, but it made him actually absorb electricity. So whenever Beatrix would cast her big thunder slash or whatever, which would do a ton of damage, everybody would take damage, and Zidane would be completely healed. Getting hundreds of points of bonus of health. So there are like things that you want to like. Yeah, you never throw anything away in these games, like, because who cares? Infinite bag. Of stuff, and you want to actually have that stuff accessible to you because there's going to be a thing that's like, oh, this is exactly what I need for this battle.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. There are attacks that are a pain in the neck, absolute pain in the neck, that come in later in the game, but every one of them has that sort of rock paper scissors approach. It's just it's like that version of rock paper scissors, which is like 25 different things.
Right. Yeah, great. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So do you keep multiple pieces of the same equipment for, because I'm kind of like, I've been keeping one of everything because I may want somebody to have that ability and have them wear it, but I haven't kept 4 of everything in case I get someplace where they all need electricity absorption or something. Right.
Well, I basically never sell anything in Final Fantasy games because it's tedious more than anything else. Yeah. And in particular in this game especially, and I don't really remember if it was true of the 7 or 8. You do have the synthesis option as well. So often you'll go into a store and it's like, oh, you can synthesize. You can just go down the list and it'll tell you what you need for everything. Yeah. Some Japanese RPGs actually hide that information. Like Dragon Quest VIII, they had a similar device. There was like a alchemy pot or some weird thing where you could just put stuff in, and sometimes you'd get good stuff out after a few days. It was weird. Of course, in the days of the internet, you can just go online and get a list of all the great stuff you can get out of that thing. But at least in Final Fantasy IX, you just go in and it says, oh, if you bring me 2 of these, and there might be a store in town where you can buy those things, and sometimes you can't. So I just hold on to everything because mostly I can't be bothered. It might be that later in the game you sort of feel the need to sell off pricier items, just to kind of, because you're like, oh, I really want that great new spear for Freya or whatever.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of that when I was money starved, but not too much. But as far as like your prediction on where to play to, it feels like the margin of error for this game can be, rather than minutes, hours.
Yes, unfortunately.
Like, I noticed I took a note that my save time, hours played for the save itself. Last save was 13 hours, but then my Steam played time is 17 hours.
Yep. So that's not going to be uncommon. Mine's all out of whack because I left it running overnight one time. But
yeah, I actually intentionally have been not doing that because I wanted to kind of track that specific statistic to see how far off they were. So when I stopped,
I just forget that Steam does that, so it's just weird for me. Yeah. But anyway, so we're going to play to Mount Galug.
Can't wait.
And we'll talk about kind of how things develop next time. Like I said, I think there's a pretty big event that's going to come up about in the middle of this play section, and I look forward to your reactions to that.
Yeah, there's been a lot of big events up to this point. So
there have. Yeah. I know, the destructions of whole cities. I mean, it's just like this game doesn't pull any punches. But yeah, in the meantime, you can find us on Twitter. The handle for the podcast is @DevGameClub, and I am @Brett_Duville. You are
at Tim Longo Jr.
That's right. Well done. You can find the podcast at devgameclub.com. You can shoot us email at devgameclub@gmail.com, or rate and review us on iTunes, and we are now also on Google Play. Somebody contacted me on Twitter and said, hey, do you plan on going on to Google Play at all? And I was like, I don't even know what that is. But we are up on that now as well. So we're basically anywhere you can get a podcast, and keep on listening. We look forward to hearing from you. And in the meantime, I am Brett, and he is
Tim.
Kupo?
Oh, geez.
Good night.
Comes full circle.
That's right. Good night, Tim.
Good night.